Why do people still believe in nofap? Why do they swear that dopamine detoxes will save them? It's almost strange. You'd think by now, after years of people trying, failing, relapsing, cycling through the same shame and promises, that the message would be clear. These so-called solutions don't work. But the internet loves simple answers. It loves a clean story you can repeat to yourself like a mantra. And so we get this illusion. If you just stop touching yourself, if you just starve your dopamine, if you just abstain long enough, magically, you'll be healed. But here's the truth, and it's uncomfortable. That story is a lie. And if you've been building your recovery on that lie, you're not just wasting your time, you're digging yourself deeper. Let's spell out the internet's favorite myth. The story goes like this. Porn hijacks your dopamine. It fries your reward system. Your brain gets hooked like a rat in the lab. And the fix? Easy. Stop watching. Quit cold turkey. Reset your dopamine. Do a detox. That's the sales pitch behind nofap, behind dopamine detox, behind the endless YouTube videos promising you a reset. And it sounds scientific, it feels empowering, and at first it even feels like it's working. But here's the problem, it's built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the brain works. You've been told dopamine is the enemy, that porn addiction is just dopamine overload, and the cure is dopamine starvation. But dopamine doesn't work like that. It isn't a battery you drain and recharge. It isn't a faucet you can turn off and suddenly reset. Dopamine is a signal. It's not addiction itself. It's how your brain assigns salience, how it decides what matters in the moment. So when someone tells you just do a dopamine detox, what they're really saying is ignore how your entire stress system, your hormones, and your personality actually work, and pretend that starving yourself will cure you. And it doesn't. It can't. Which leads us to the question most people avoid. If dopamine isn't the problem, then what is? Almost everything you hear about pornography addiction is built on slogans, streaks, willpower, dopamine detox. Let's move to nofap. Nofap is sold as a lifestyle, a brotherhood, an identity, and its premise is so simple it feels irrefutable. Stop watching porn, stop masturbating, and your brain will heal. And at first it feels true. You quit. You feel a rush of energy, you get a sense of pride, maybe you even feel like your social confidence improves. But then comes the crash, the cravings, the relapse, the shame spiral. Because abstinence alone doesn't rewire anything. It doesn't teach your body new patterns. It doesn't resolve the stress cycles that push you back into compulsion. Nofap is like putting tape over a leaking pipe. For a moment, it looks fixed, but the pressure builds underneath, and eventually it bursts. So the question is, if abstinence isn't the fix, why do so many cling to it like a religion? That's a question most people aren't ready to face. Here's why these myths survive. They give you the feeling of progress without the reality of progress. They give you streaks to count. They give you a community to report to. They give you buzzwords like dopamine detox that sound like science. And when you fail, the answer is always the same. Try harder, start over, day one again. It's an endless loop, and some people spend years trapped in it. The illusion works because it makes you feel like you're fighting, like you're taking control, but in truth, you're only rehearsing failure. And this raises a deeper question. If the fight itself is the trap, then what actually breaks you out? Again, porn addiction is not about dopamine. It's not about abstinence. It's not about streaks or detoxes. It's about the deeper systems underneath. Stress hormones, personality, adaptation, the way your body, mind, and identity build patterns together. That's not a conversation of quick fixes. That's not something you solve with 30-day challenges or viral self-help mantras. It's a structural reality, and unless you see that structure, you will always fall back into the same traps, no matter how many times you reset. But here's the catch. The real mechanics, the way these systems actually drive behavior, aren't the kind of thing that survives in an algorithm-driven space like this. Here's what almost nobody talks about. Pornography addiction doesn't just live in dopamine. It runs deeper into the stress axis itself. Every relapse, every binge fires signals through the pituitary, CRH, ACTH, driving the adrenals into overdrive. Cortisol spikes, adrenergic responses sharpen. And that feels like craving, like urgency, like high libido. But it's not. It's stress, disguised as desire. Sexual aggression manufactured by cortisol and adrenaline. Not authentic intimacy. And it looks different depending on the profile. In men, compulsive novelty seeking. In women, estrogen amplifying the feedback loops, making the craving feel inescapable. This is why abstinence alone doesn't work, because when your metabolic profile is wired into the stress cycle, quitting porn doesn't reset it. It just pauses the same machine that will fire up again the moment the right trigger appears. That's the piece no dopamine detox, no no-fat reboot can ever explain. And that's why I built Apophenia. Not for street counters or quick fix seekers, but for people ready to map the architecture of stress, hormones, and metabolism that makes this cycle so relentless. Once you see how CRH, cortisol, adrenergic responses, and estrogen weave together to create the illusion of libido, you can't unsee it. And once the illusion collapses, the real picture comes into focus. So now you face a choice. You can stay in the cycle, dopamine detox, relapse, shame, repeat. You can keep mistaking stress-driven urgency for real desire. You can keep running in circles, or you can step outside the illusion. But that step doesn't happen here, not on YouTube. Because the real conversation, the one about pituitary cascades, cortisol floods, estrogen's modulation, and the metabolic fingerprints that keep you trapped, doesn't survive in 10 minutes. It only exists when you leave behind the fragments and look at the structure whole. And once you do, the myths collapse. The only question is, are you ready to see it? If you made it this far, you already know the usual answers aren't enough. Apophenia is a forum dedicated to understanding pornography addiction from a biological perspective. Pituitary, cortisol, adrenergic, spikes, estrogen rhythms, and metabolic profiles. Sign up is free, and there's also a free document waiting for you in the description below that lays out the foundations of what most people miss. If you want to see how the pieces really fit together, step inside and you'll never look at addiction the same way again.